conversation. Um, Sifu Dan was in Miami for our annual seminar, and I had asked him something about doing the numerata, and he said, "Oh, I have to be careful because you have to have a certain amount of drummers when you do it, and if you don't do it the right way, somebody might complain and whatever." Is that right? Can that be right?
Wow. You put me in an awkward position. You do know that.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. No, then.
No. But it's a very great. I'll tell you what's great about that question. What's great about that question, he's exactly right, and you're exactly very intriguing to dig under the underlayer, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So he is correct in a lot of ways, because when they teach that, the one of the things that they try to do is the 3 Ks, and that particular area that he's talking about with the drum, with the beat, and in rhythm is called Kali Han, which literally means in rhythm with yourself, your opponent, and with your goal.
Yeah.
And it's a very precision type of training, so to speak, because not everybody has rhythm, as you know. And even if you do have rhythm, right, rhythm is really hard to sort of like control. Mm-hmm. It takes a long time, even for professional boxers or fighters, or even for people that are in, let's say, sports or athletics. Rhythm, even if you are gifted with even having it, you still have to train it, because it's a very hard thing. It's almost like an engine having perfect timing all the time.
Right.
So I think he is absolutely correct in his viewpoint. And interestingly enough, that's a very intriguing question, because it's under the underlayer of the normal surface,
Well, okay. Well, see, this is the thing, right? Okay, so for those of you who are coming in on our conversation, welcome to the Jeet Kune Dialogues, episode number 268, with my good friend Guy Chase, who I beg your forgiveness. You probably have the record for the longest interval between appearances. You were here for episode 17, I think it was, in 2018.
Oh my word. Where is time going? It's slipping through our hands like the sand.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure. So I apologize for not reaching out to you a lot sooner.
No, it's
but
fine.
I've been looking around your website and your Facebook page and what have you, and I wanted to ask you, what happened up there during COVID with your schools?
So I had 2 really big schools. I had one in and I live on the seacoast of like Boston, so it's this area has become relatively very expensive, unfortunately, in a lot of ways. And I had a 7,500 square foot school in Newburyport, Mass. Mm-hmm. And I had a 3,500 square foot school in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And I was running them both.
Right.
And so, and I did it for quite a long time. And then when COVID came, obviously, that just froze everybody and froze everything. So, that being said, I'm in an area, for one, where the real estate's extremely high. And now I'm in the worst business you could possibly be in. Right. So if you're in a restaurant business, or you're in a martial art business, or a health business, or a gym business, you're in the worst business you could possibly imagine in COVID time. Mm-hmm. If you're in the computer business, you can still communicate, you can do things through electronically computer, but you can, this type of atmosphere, you're in the worst business possible. So I ended up, the government came in and just said, down, seize it up. And so, like many schools. Now, of course, they came in and said, look, we'll give you, this much money and you can, prolong and you can. But to be honest with you, it took me so many years to go into business, and I did okay for myself because I don't think a lot of people realize that, like the money I made in martial arts, I think I told you before, right, that I was educated in historical renovation because that's what I did when I studied martial arts, and I
Mhm.
did very well. So I invested my money into real estate. So I had done okay for myself, and I didn't want to go and owe the government a couple $100,000. In my world was changing too anyway.
Right.
It was changing as far as like I was most of I don't think a lot of people realize that, look, having the big schools is great, but the issue becomes is it's a lot of work.
It is.
A lot of maintenance. It's a lot of work, and it's also it wasn't. This is kind of an awkward. It wasn't my threat almost because I was trained in a different type of scenario, as you know. So in other words, Guru Dan, Herman Swander, Kyle Goff. I mean, these people were. I was trained in basically a garage
Right.
or a warehouse space, right?
Right. Yes.
So the commercial ideology, it was great for I guess, a public, sort of like image, and it's great because I had instructors and everything that would teach the kids classes and the adult classes and all this. But for what we know and for what we did and how we trained, that's a very complicated thread to put into that
Mhm.
piece of material
Yeah.
because people just can't get that overnight. And from 85% of your clientele, unless are basically just they want to go in, they want to train, and they want to go home. Now at one point in time when I had the Greenland gym, I had I think 35 fighters at a time, and that can be a whole different ball game too. That's like it's like having a kettle of raising dogs, puppies. It's just you're training fighters all the time and pad feeding all the time, and
Right.
dieting, and make sure everybody's on, and your medical records and lining everything up. It's a lot of work, and I'm not afraid of the work, but what ends up
Obviously.
happening is it relies all on you, right? A lot of that just becomes a lot on you, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So that's it's now I just physically can't do it, to be honest with you, because you start to develop arthritis and bursitis in your wrist, and from the pad feed,
Right.
and it's just so. I guess to answer your question, when COVID came, um, I was doing a lot of privates, and I was doing a lot of on that scale, that because that was mostly my bread and butter anyway. The schools, what they do inside the schools, and it pays for the building, and it pays for the staff and stuff. It does okay, and does, it's a great place to promulgate. But for the most part, most of my bread and butter was just basically coming from privates,
Right.
is my private stock.
Yeah. So what's the atmosphere today in 2023 post COVID?
So for me,
Yeah.
well, I mean, it's sort of like one of these, you get forced in a forgery, right? So, um, I had, collected like some serious data over the years. And I think I was telling you that I mean, collections of, from the 1960s of, Ben Lagusa performing in the Long Beach tournament in 1964, all the way
Yeah.
up to a lot of stuff, even with Guru Dan was in that I don't even think he knows, a lot of Kyle Gotch stuff, a lot of, and I was collecting this over an enormous amount of time. I even have, and I don't even think and I don't even know, I've never seen him before, except what I have. I even have Herman Swander when he was in Indonesia, the original series that he did for Street Fighting, when he gets attacked in cars and automobiles. and on the street, it's very distorted.
Yeah.
You know, and he gave me these years and years ago. So the collection I have on a mass scale of this videos and this documentation is enormous in size. And so I said, this is sort of like my next tier that I wanted to do. I wanted to sort of like document and write, these sort of like um, historical, events.
Mhm.
And one of them is an interview with Flo Villabrillo in the room talking about his death matches with his son, Lucky Lakai, Ted Lakai, Mel Lopez, and Ben Lagusa, all when they were like 30 years old. So
Oh
we're
my
going
God.
back quite a number. I mean, I think this was somewhere, had to be somewhere around 1970. I
Right.
don't even know, something, So that, and it's coming right from Flo's word of mouth, his experiences and how he trained with the Blind Princess and how he, fought against the Mole Prince and how I mean, some really incredible footage. And so again, my goal, I said, it's sort of like how like you achieve schools and you achieve this or you achieve that. It doesn't matter what you achieve in life. It's sort of like you wanna move on to the next
Mhm.
tier. What's the next? You know what I mean? What's the next?
Yeah.
It's not because I'm bored with martial arts or anything like that, because I still do this as a profession. But I wanted to say, look, I've done, the schools, I've done the commercial, what do I want to do next with it?
Right.
So this is sort of like the next level that I want to kind of, and that's what I've really been working on a lot, is a lot of historical stuff, writing and documentation and getting these videos prepared for the public.
I assume that a lot of that is converting the video stuff to digital, huh?
So this is the interesting thing is about this. These were almost like lost archives. Interestingly enough, they
Right.
were lost. I think one time I was down at a seminar. One of the conferences down at Guru Dan's, and I showed Guru Dan and Joel, and even Guru Dan says, "Man, where did you get that stuff?
Right.
I don't think I've ever seen this, or if I have, I can't remember." You know
Mhm.
what I mean?
Mhm.
So it's really some old stuff. But I said basically, I said, Ponton Mel Lopez gave it to me, a box of it, and he said, can you, redigitize it or do something? And I said, yeah,
Yeah.
of course. Again, I'm a preservative, right? So I guess in a lot of ways,
Right. Yeah.
even with homes, I seem to be a preservative of them, so.
That's it's really interesting because I I don't know if I told you this, but um, you posted. I'll pull it up here. Tell me if can you see can you see
Yes.
that? Okay. So
In
you
fact, that's
post
hanging on my wall.
yeah. So you posted that a while ago, and I saw it, and I go, I think this photograph is his life. So I'm gonna ask him if he'll come on on the program and talk to me about this photograph because there's something about this that I think it's not just the it's a picture of two people who trained you, but I think it's way more than that, especially because of what's on that board.
Yeah,
Am I
that's a
crazy?
very no, and that's why I mean that's why I love you, because you are not you actually go below the surface. You actually start cutting into the layers, and it's interesting that you bring that photo up because Ben Lagusa and Mel Lopez obviously are in that photo teaching, and that was a workshop for the gurus back in California, and I lived in Northern California. I mean, I don't even know how old that is. It's somewhere in the 90s.
Mhm.
Um, but that's a very interesting. In fact, can you? I just
Yeah,
want to grab it. Doesn't
yeah,
excuse me. I just want to
sure.
grab.
In fact, let's see if I can if we do that.
So in it, It's interesting because I have it on the wall.
Right.
It's one of my favorite photos, and of course my eyesight is so bad, but yeah, yeah. Major, minor, the triad.
Yeah. So
Um,
I
fight.
know that this is called the Jeet Kune Do dialogues, but what the heck, right?
Well, I
Can
mean,
you talk
and let
about
me
this?
stop you right there, Dwight. And I don't mean to interrupt. And
That's
that's
right.
and that's what's this is the Jeet Kune Do dialogue. But the interesting part about Jeet Kune Do, and I think maybe this might be where some people don't get Jeet Kune Do, right? Is that
Right.
what is Jeet Kune Do, right? Jeet Kune Do, we know, and composes, of course, the arts, and many arts. It can compose a lot of things. But the interesting thing about Jeet Kune Do to me is the fact that it composes, or it takes in many different philosophies and concepts, right? So we can look at something like Kali and say, my word, like that's almost like something you would see in Jeet Kune Do, not really Kali, a screamer or Kali or something. And so it to me, that's why I think it's interesting how, like, Jeet Kune Do and Kali can be. We're not saying it is the same art by far, but it can certainly have the same concepts and philosophy by large margins.
Yeah.
And so, and this sort of like proves a point. And it's funny because I didn't really notice this picture until years, this was like years after some. I mean, I took the photo, and of course, I was at the seminar, but it really intrigued me the way that it's sort of like spoken volume, and in its literature. And those two guys, particularly those two men, or those two forefathers, I always call them, and I would even call Guru Dan my forefather, is that, they were very incited about when they're speaking of Kali.
Mhm.
They're very in depth. And this sort of like is a portion of that workshop that would be, in depth, would be, the philosophical side or the spiritual side, not just the physical appearance,
Right.
of it. So, it's a very in detailed photo about the Filipino Kali, Lagusa Kali. It really does encompass some great philosophy. So I posted it, and I can see, if I look on yours, I can see yours even, but yeah, large circle, small circle, and that's the Tayada Mahara. That's the circles that you used to see in Guru Dan's old
In
academy.
old school.
Donuts, we call them donuts, right?
Yeah.
And it talks about the major, minor, right, and the triad concept. So the triad concepts, or it's what's funny, it's really, I look at Guru Dan. So I mean, people talk about Jeet Kune Do, right? This is Guru Dan's older stuff.
Right.
And you see how many triangles he's got?
Hmm.
And and he talks about the spiritual triangle, and he talks about the internal triangle. So really that's and I believe that's where, he encompassed that system, and took it into his. But when we talk about, like, it says the major, minor, that would be the major, minor hits, right? So if you talk about rhythm, major, minor hits, particularly in the Kali, Villabilla Lugusa Kali, is very pronounced, because major would be a hard strike, minor is a light strike, major could be like a drop body weight, minor could be a light body weight. And how is that sort of like important? Well, it's sort of like if you're shifting a car and you're in a race car and you're shifting in between gears, it has to be sort of like this neutral in between where you're shifting,
Hmm.
right? For just this race cars drive it all the time. I
Yeah.
mean, they do it all the time, right? So you just can't be full out rhythm. And it's the same thing with fighters in a
I
ring. It's the
was just
same.
going to ask you that. I
It's the
was just
same
going to say,
thing,
you're
right?
talking about fighting. Yeah.
They have to have the composure of going strong, hard hits, and then
Mhm.
parry light, right? It has to have that sort of like, heavy to hard, or hard to heavy, or, strike or defense. And that's really what that's based on. And in particular with that system, because the stick is heavy, you have to be in rhythm with it. And as I have always stated, a light stick, you lead it into battle with your wrist because it's light. So you could, you snap it out. A heavy stick, you can't do that. It will fly out of your hand. So if you try to take a baseball bat and just try to do like a backhand retic, right, or a redondo or a witic, it'll fly. For one, it could break your wrist because it's so heavy, or it would fly out of your hand because it's heavy. So with a light stick, the composure is that your wrist is constantly moving and maneuvering the stick. But with the heavy stick, you can't do that. So the body has to compose it. So with a heavy stick, the body, the stick has to lead you into battle. With a light stick, you're leading it to battle. You understand? So if I have a heavy stick, that's going to lead me into the battle.
Yeah.
If I have a light stick, the light stick, I'm leading it into battle.
Right.
Because the heavy stick's too heavy. You can't lead it. It's like taking an axe and swinging it. You're not going to control that. You doing your swinging motion. But once it's done, you have to let it go on its kind of own and get repetitive swings. So the major minor encompasses that with rhythm.
Yeah.
It's very hard to be in rhythm and have superb footwork with something that's extraordinarily heavy. With a light stick, it's a little bit easier, right?
It's incredible because, again, like you said, there are people who are, they're gonna resist this way of thinking. But everything that you have said there, I can see a correlation in empty-handed fighting. I can see a correlation in how you would approach kicking and punching, whether it's in Savate or in Muay Thai or what have you. And for me, that is one of the greatest gifts that the art of Kali lends or gives to everything else that we do. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. And I don't think the public really this is, I guess, and this is my own sort of like, ignorance, or not ignorance, I should say, but selfishness, right? So I love history and I love, preservation and preserving. Not because I don't allow that in my training, because in training you have to succeed and go forward, and you have to, you have to come up with because the new athletes and the new fighters are extraordinary, right? I mean, they're just so advanced because they have the exposure of, like, the arts and the exposure of the training. But as time goes on, like I've said, we lose a preservation in the history and the knowledge because it just moves so fast, right? And so, that being said, that's one of the things that I kind of try to preserve, is a lot of that knowledge, because that knowledge really can overlap into other arts, and other arts can overlap into it.
Mm-hmm.
The same as, like we talk about, like Jeet Kune and Kali. And I don't think a lot of people understand that Bruce Lee, by the way, and Ben Lagusa had a relationship. So, I think, in fact, Linda Lee invited Ben Lagusa at that, when they had that nucleus whole thing set up in the 90s. And he was there as a guest speaker, because he was one of the 7 people that performed at the Long Beach tournament, the 64 and the 65. And I don't think a lot of people realize that there was a 1964 and there was a 65. And the famous with Guru Dan with Bruce Lee is the later one. But the first one that Bruce Lee and Ben Lagusa and they were in was the 1964.
64, yeah.
Right, and that was the black and white.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, I even asked Guru Dan this to try to get my historical stuff straight. But they say that, Bruce Lee would call Ben Lagusa a master. And they said, he said that in front of the podium in front of the Long Beach tournament. So I had confirmed that with Godin, and he said that's true.
Yeah.
See, I wanted to get some history, and I also wanted to ask him, like I said, with the Kempo karate. A lot of people don't realize that Kempo karate with the round circle with the bullseye, that's Ben Lagusa's actual symbol. And Ed Parker put that in his symbol and wanted Ben Lagusa to be his first black belt. That's why he put it in the Kempo Karate logo. Because Kempo Karate, you'll see all these sort of like slap hits. They look like guntains, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it comes from the Kali, the backyard training that Ben Lagusa was given at Parker. So I don't think people realize there's some serious history between, Bruce Lee, Rudan Santo, Ben Lagusa, and Ed Parker. Now, of course, there's many others, but still,
Was Sifu Dan already training? Did he decide to train under Bruce Lee and Ben Lagusa in '64? Do you know?
He did. He was, because Gudan's father was influencing him to be with people like Ben Lagusa and Flo Villabillo and that.
Yeah.
And according to Lopez and Lagusa, see, back then they didn't allow too many whites in. But then again, I think you can even, I think Dan will even back this up. Everybody, that race, each race kept separate back then. You know what I mean? It was real. But with the Filipinos, they mostly gathered by themselves.
Yeah.
It wasn't like they were exposing this on a sort of like a mass scale. It was. In fact, that was the first time they say that Kali was ever seen was in the '64 Long Beach tournament.
And what's the story about Ben Lagusa and Kato and the Green Hornet?
Yeah. So since Ed Parker was training with Ben Lagusa, the movie industry came to Ed Parker and asked him for a Green Hornet type. And Ben Lagusa was really, in his day, was quite a composure. He was 165 pounds, and he was, he was very muscular, but he was super fast. He was very fast. And I don't know that because of course, that's before my time, right? But when I trained with this man in his older years, this man was like Kyle Gotch. He was still fast. He was still strong and fast. And with Ben Lagusa, to me, his prime point or his highlight is his rhythm is insane. It's something beyond anything I've ever experienced. Just to like his whole rhythm with the stick and how his feet and his hands and his stick can move. So, I can see where Ed Parker goes, I got the perfect man. He's my teacher. Right. And so what happened is that Ben was, Grandmaster Ben was working for the U.S. Mint in San Francisco, which was a great job, right? So he had a really good position with the U.S. Mint in San Francisco, and he took a few days to think about it, and he didn't want to move down to Los Angeles and move his kids and wife, and he wanted to keep his job. So, the story is that they said, well, who's next in line? Look at this guy. This guy could be Kato, right? This guy could be Kato easily. Yeah. So, and I think, and I, for my documents, it was, and then Ben couldn't be Ed Parker's black belt. And this is a funny little twist to this whole story because he had paid homage to Floral. See, I guess that, that was gonna be, the how that system got stepped down and passed on.
Yeah, right.
And so he couldn't be Ed Parker's black belt, so Ed Parker made Grudin his first black belt.
They sound like they're the perfect match for you in terms of their sense of history, their morality, their ethics. Like I get the sense that it's right in line with how you approach things.
Well, it's interesting because one of my oldest and top students is Mark Delagrati, and he's been with me for 28 years. So, and he works at the USC, but he's trained a massive amount of fighters, and it's almost. I mean, he's carded 60 UFC fights. I think, and 7 of them were world champion belt fights. So the amount of training he's done for fighters or with fighters is massive.
Mm-hmm.
And his background is really, I mean, he has a Muay Thai teacher and he has a Jeet Kune teacher, basically, right? Myself, for me. But it's interesting how people, like that got involved in sort of like the MMA world, right? And how it got laced into it. Because obviously, I can tell you as a teacher that even if you're teaching fighters or whatever, if fighters evolve. So if they start doing judo and jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai, and then everybody else is doing jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai, there has to be another tier.
Right.
Because if you know the same game that I do, eventually this just becomes an equal match of chess, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So then comes in like these little, parries and checks and hits. Like, whoa, what's that? And now look what you're seeing in UFC. Now you're seeing, kicks to the calf. Well, Savat's been doing kicks to the calf forever, right? And people are now just discovering this. I'll just kick the calf and hurt him, right? So he can't walk.
Yeah.
So, there's this. For me, the arts in the beginning were horrible. I couldn't sell them. You couldn't. It was like you couldn't. It's like driving an electric car in sort of like the 1950s. You couldn't sell it. People were just like, what is Silat? And this, this was going back when I first put schools in Boston and stuff in the early 90s.
Right.
But now, of course, I think people can see the intertwine. Do you know what I mean? I really think they can see that you can layer one, you can layer another, you can layer, like Herman Swander's, like I said, Herman Swander's first stuff, when his first stuff, that I know, the stuff that I was taught, it was brutal. That's why I have ripped shoulders or ligaments or whatever, but it was absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
It reminded me of jiu-jitsu a lot on the ground because he would lock you and tie you and twist you.
Right.
And again.
Interesting. Another thing I noticed about you and the makeup of your school, and I want to ask you if this is deliberate. The structure of your school covers what I call the four skills of empty-handed combat: the kicking, the punching, the trapping, and the grappling, and also weaponry. So, I mean, did you consciously sit down and go, okay, well, we got to make sure that this and this and this, or was it just organic that it ended up that way?
So it's organic. It was organic, and that's a funny question you ask, and it's a very sort of like interesting way that you look. You kind of see that because let's say for an example that I would have 10 fighters and I'm teaching them to this and trapping or grappling or into the trapping and sweep or takedowns, and then all of a sudden maybe they'll come in early on another class and they're starting to see somebody over in the corner with a stick. Right, or with a blade, and it doesn't have to, of course, to somebody that is not really unfamiliar with a stick or a pocket stick, let's say, for example, or a blade. It's very unfamiliar and it's very foreign because they are really training to concentrate on really getting in a cage or getting with somebody and professionally fighting. So, but this is where the lines cross. If they're an athlete or a fighter or a martial artist, let's say, that has an open palate, you start to see that an example, let's say hypothetically, a parry with in a hand can look very similar with a parry with a blade or with a stick, or it can have some similarities, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting and where it can help is that it can really build sensitivity beyond what normally the fighter can get with his training or pad feeder. Because
Right.
when you start swinging, which you start to see now, and so this is what I said, Dwight. I said, the new trainers are doing Kali and don't even realize it. And one of my students said, why, how is that, Ruben? I was like, well, everybody's got noodles now. 1 angle, 2 angle, 3 angle, 4. Like it's called it's Filipino martial arts. It's not MMA fight. They're just they're hitting the pads and the trainer's just doing all. And he doesn't take one class of Kali or one right.
Right.
But now people can see the similarity. Like, oh my god, like he's doing Kali, and the fighter is checking the sticks with his hands. So a person can't really say that it can't cross over, because you can clearly see it's crossing over now. Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, so okay. Well, this is interesting, because one of my conundrums is everybody knows about Bruce Lee, but not as many people know about his art. A lot of MMA people continue to be inspired by Bruce Lee and the idea of, let's call it cross training for lack of a different expression. But still, even in the fight realm, unless I'm incorrect about this, even in the realm of fighting, Jeet Kune Do itself is still not that well known.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
But people are doing it without even knowing that they are, or it's influencing them. So what do we do about that situation? What do we do about that situation? Is there anything to be done?
Well, that's it's a very interesting point that you bring up, right? So I said this, and this is just my opinion, right? But the reason why that happens is because things happen out of desperation. Things happen when you get to a point where everything is empty. So what does that mean? Well, all options are off the table, so the table is now blank, just like Jeet Kune Do says. Empty your cup.
Mm-hmm.
You're hypothetically, you're in the fight, right? You're in the second or third round, and the counter for counter goes, and the jiu-jitsu and the boxing goes, and the leg kicks are going, and everything's going, and all of a sudden, somebody's against the cage and does a bizette and a knee to the face and knocks somebody. Like, what was that? Right? But it happens out of desperation. Or you see something like, a split entry, and what happens, what happens now in the MMA. So they don't know Jeet Kune Do, but everybody's vertical fisted now. You know why? Because they can get the longer reach. The MMA glove is on. They can do the longer reach. Now they're realizing they can get another 5 inches out of the vertical fist. So you're seeing people like Conor McGregor take it from the rear, throw the chun chui because he can reach the opponent longer, right? So you're seeing things happen out of desperation. They're skilled. They're very highly skilled. Yeah. But there's a point in your own training and even in combat and even a high level of competition where things become, because let's put it this way, like fighters can get up to like in the competition realm or into the UFC or into that bracket up to like near the top 20. But now coming into that top 20, that's where barriers have to break. Because now you're facing opponents or adversary or the same people that know the same stuff that you do. So your understanding has to be higher to win. And that's, I think, makes it a break. So desperation happens, right, out of, sort of like emptiness. It's sort of like, you've ran out of the options, right? Yeah. So what's the next option? Well, I'll break his calf, right? Or I'll break his shin, or I'll, and nobody thought that would ever happen. So I say things sometimes are born out of when you don't have anything options out on the table. And to me, that's clearly Jeet Kune Do.
That's interesting.
You've completely erased the palette, and you've taken in things that you would not normally sort of like do in your
Right.
everyday training, and all of a sudden, it worked in a like even a championship fight. So
In the 1980s in Muay Thai with Ajahn Chai, there was not a whole lot of foot sweeping and Ken and what is up with Kenjit Siko in MMA these days? Everybody's doing it.
it's born out of desperation.
Yeah.
So what it is, it was always there. And for you and I, and for that group, we knew it as Kenjik Siko, right? But for the fighter or for the competitor, he didn't know it from a hole in the wall,
Mhm.
because they don't they don't concentrate on the whiteboard. They concentrate on the prize. Let's get this, let's win the fight. Let's get the conditioning. Let's win. They have a very sort of like inside mind. But
Right.
can you imagine? So then this is what I sort of like, this is what I think, can you imagine now taking that level of thinking how Bruce Lee took it? Now he's doing it not just on a physical level, but he's doing it on a mental level. He's doing it on a spiritual level. He's combining all that into one. And I think that's what makes his image, or himself, so like powerful,
Yeah.
right? But the art itself, Jeet Kune Do, it's people still, of course, it's still sort of like that. It's Bruce Lee, right?
Yeah.
And of course it's Bruce Lee. But I don't think people realize, especially, maybe some of the fighting, people are influenced by Bruce Lee because of his image. But the in-depth of thinking and mental physical training and the spirituality that he had involved,
Mhm.
I think is so undiscovered by them.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot of a lot of training by him, in a lot of thinking, and a lot of research that he did.
Yeah.
He did a lot of research, and a lot of experimental stuff with his Jeet Kune Do.
I want to ask you about tell people a little bit about your when you were a nomad, right? Because you lived in Northern California, then you lived in Southern California, and then you were in Tampa with Carl Gotch, and probably a whole bunch of other places that I don't know about, right? What?
Thailand, yeah, I
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, what was, to use a simplistic expression, what was that all about? That
Well,
quest.
so when I was a kid, when I was much younger, I was in heavy into judo, right? And because that's really what you could only find back in the day. But and then by the time I was a teenager, I was doing, a lot of competitions, but a lot of not, you know, judo kind of fizzed out, when I was like 13, 14, and I kind of moved into the, wushu, Wao Lam Kung Fu, and I was competing, in New England, championships. And there was like Christine Rodriguez, me and her were the same age, and I'd see her in the corner competing. She was
Wait,
huge. I used to
hang,
see her flip
hang,
up and
hang on a second there. Wait, if
yeah.
you're in New England in Walloon and wushu competitions, what have you, did you come across Bao Sim Mak and Donnie Yen and those people as well?
Yeah, like and Jim Ling Yang, and yeah, I
Yeah,
knew, yeah, all those, yeah. So I trained with Tom Tam, who was, I mean, these, it was sort of like, that was sort of like the new tier, right?
yeah, right.
I was getting into those arts, and I became, certified at a high rank in those, and I was competing. And I was at the age of 18, and I went down, and I wanted something more, because those arts were beautiful, like in like two-man, sets with weaponry, and they were good in tournament fighting. But I didn't have anything past that.
Mhm.
I didn't know anything past that, actually, because there was no exposure. And the only thing I exposed myself to back then was, you look in the back of the magazines, and of course I was, with like all kids, I was influenced by Bruce Lee. So when I was 17, I was looking through the magazine, and I saw Guru Dan being down in South Carolina, and I said, I'm going to fly down, because of course I've read all the Bruce Lee books, and I had them, and I was like, I didn't know even Guru Dan was Guru Dan, right? I just knew him as Dan DeSanto, but I said, I'm going to fly down to this. And actually, believe it or not, when I saw Francis Fong last time, I said this to Sifu Francis Fong. I was at Rick Ilroy's. I think I'm saying that right.
McElroy.
And I was 17, yeah. And Guru Dan, and I spent 2 days, doing the seminar. And Guru Dan came up and he said, "Listen, you said, I'd love to train you. I can't feed you, but you can live at my school." And I didn't know what that was, but I got so excited. I was like, "What?" Because I just loved what he was teaching and doing, and I had no clue about it, right? I was really skilled in weaponry because I already had the wushu and background and the Chinese background. So double broadswords. I used to teach Salam, believe it or not, because I had all the classical Chinese weapons, and he loved that. In fact, I gave him all my classical Chinese weapons, and so it was hard. I didn't know anything about it. So again, he said, "I can't feed you, but I can let you live at the school." So I said, well, it really hit me hard. You know what I mean? Like my heart in my chest. And I said, "Man, this is the greatest martial artist to me," And Francis Fong came up and he said, "Listen, he doesn't do that all the time, and you should take it." And Francis has that heavy accent.
Yeah.
He has a really heavy accent. And I said, "Wow." And so I did. I went back to my parents, believe it or not. I was going to go in the military, and I said, "I'm going to go out." And they were like, "You're crazy. Are you serious? Like, where are you going to sleep? Where are you going to stay?" I said, "I don't know, but I'm going." And then from there, it just, I call it the golden era. It's like going to Thailand in like 2003 and 1. It's like the classic golden era of Muay Thai. Duke Rufus said that was like the golden era of Muay Thai, like 2003, 1, 2, 4.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the pinnacle of Muay Thai. So, of course,
You mean in terms of its global popularity, or what do you mean?
So in like that era in Thailand, it was Rajadam Lumpini Stadium, right? So it was the old stadium, and it's the Thais, fighting each other, and it didn't become like Thai boxing today. It's really globalized, right? So it's very commercialized.
Yeah.
So you didn't see you very rarely, once in a while you see a European, once in a great while, you know what I mean? So, and it doesn't mean that's why it wasn't good or bad, but if you see Muay Thai today, it's like they even fight with the MMA gloves on, which I hate, which I don't like. It becomes it's like the skill is taken out, because if you get hit with an MMA glove, you can get knocked out immediately, right? So the 5 rounds can't be at that level in Muay Thai with the gloves on. But in that era, in that time, that in the 2000s, and that area, the golden era, they say, it's because it was sort of like at its like peak before it became explosively known, right?
Yeah.
And not that it's not great now, but now the stadiums are much bigger. There's less people. It's not as condensed. And the fighters are definitely highly skilled, for sure. It's not taking anything away from the fighters, but it doesn't have that condensity excitement to it. Like back in the day when Rajadhan and Lumpini Stadium, it almost felt like he was in the Roman Colosseum. Right, like the live music's going, the Thais are fighting, and the oiled up, and the live music's there, and it's just the money's just flying because they're batting. And now it's it's a huge commercial, art now because of the popularity of MMA. So it's gotten so big, and it to me it loses almost like it's not a character. It loses like it's almost like it's a ball of energy that you would normally see in a stadium, because it's so with the MMA gloves. I don't agree with it, but before it was, it was very, very traditional, and it really was.
How do the people feel about it? About the global success of their?
Oh, they love it.
Okay.
Oh, they love it.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't, because Thai people, they make more money from it, because more students go to more students go to Thailand. The camps get bigger. and they make more money, and now it's more popular, so it's good for them, and it's good for the sport. So I guess, it's sort of like, you get that, you gain, but you get the loss, right? So again, when I went to Thailand, so for example, and it's not being racist or anything, right? So the gym, like Cal Summit, one of the gyms I belong to, they wouldn't allow any females in the gym because they believe it's bad luck, because Thai boxing was tied to Buddhism. In Buddhism, the female wasn't allowed to be in the ring or to be into to the male Buddhist, area. So, now it's open to everybody, which is great. And I agree it should be open to everybody. But remember back then it's almost like going into like, not in comparison, but if we could compare it, like if you go and, study Buddhism in the Himalayas somewhere, right? And you're in this mountainside and there's really nothing to sort of like abstract you or, distract you, I should say, and lose your concentration. And I guess that to me, getting back to the question of being at like Rodin's back then, right? In that Glencoe Ave little warehouse,
Yeah. I was
and
there.
then,
I was there in Marina del Rey a couple months ago, and
yeah,
and it's on Beach Avenue now, around the corner from Glencoe and Del Rio, and I'm looking. It's all built up. Remember, it was just warehouses on one side, and then that side street and what have you. It's all built up now. You can't even see the old. It's
isn't it amazing?
it's
But
incredible.
the amazing part is to get that it's sort of like, that feeling inside of that small area that he was in, right? That
Mhm.
small gym, that small dojo, that small academy,
Yeah.
and it was just sort of like it was, and everybody, of course, that's how I met, people like Herman and all the guys there, right? I mean, it was
Yeah.
just so condensed. I mean, you couldn't possibly not run into each other, right? Because it was such a small group.
There was
But
there really was so much going on there.
there really was. And you know what's funny is it's almost like it was like you'd walk in this time warp. Like you'd be, you could walk by a Taekwondo school and there'd be 200 people. And you walk by a Screw Dan's and there'd be like 15 people in there. And it's just like, it looks like a garage gym.
Mhm.
But there was so much going on in there, right? There was so much like compressed energy, compressed knowledge. And to me that was sort of like to me that's the pinnacle. And I was fortunate because again, a lot of the seniors, Jeff Chung, Ed Frankel, Steve Grody, and even Burr, all those guys were, like people like Chad and Damon were all like my classmates. We were like
Yeah.
Brad, and they were all like but they were all great. Everybody was willing to help. Oh, I don't understand. How do I get? Because I hated the dummy set. Man, did I hate the dummy set. And back in the day, it's funny, people don't realize. So back in the day, because and Ed Frankel was one of the best, 2000, because his first teacher was Steve Golden. So he had a lot of knowledge, and Jeff Chung was there since '74. So, and it's not that I hated dummy, I liked it, but it was like certain type of homework. So
Yeah.
so you damn well, he put a chart on the wall, right? And he put everybody's name, and he and he put the stars at what level that you did, sort of like the dummy, because there was so many dummy sets, and there'd be Guy Chase, and I was one of the Academy stars after a while on that course. I noticed like, man, I only got like 3 stars on this thing. I gotta get my butt moved. You know what I mean? But it was. I guess to me that was sort of like the pinnacle of
Yeah.
that training, and then of course from there it was by chance. All like the Ben Lagusa and the Cal Gotch was, that was all by really chance. But I sacrificed everything to go and study with them, and for years I didn't just go there and study for a year. I went there and studied until they said, it's time for you. You can leave now. Which was right along. Quite a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you know what's funny, Dwight, is I was just thinking of this the other day. Um, I, you know, like, uh, after a while, these teachers become almost like your father figure.
Oh yeah.
And not in a way of they're telling you but they're giving you so much knowledge and you spend so much time with them that they almost become, it's almost like you could call them your father figure because you just, you spend so much time with them and train with them all the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was hard for me to always sort of like, when it was time for me to leave to go, because I spent, years. It wasn't just overnight. And that, when you become attached like that,
Right.
you really become,
Yeah.
there's some
I,
strong feelings.
I know what you mean because I never lived in LA, so I can imagine because we're at CLAT camp a couple of months ago, and at one point I'm just standing there looking at him, listening to him talk, and I'm just like, this is it. This is life. You know what I mean? And that's for me, somebody who never lived in LA. So I can just
Yeah.
imagine that feeling multiplied. And especially when we discovered that I was the most senior person there in terms of time spent with him, you know? Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm coming up on 40 years.
Yeah. Right. And you don't so there's a great point, right? So you're doing something that you love so much that you don't realize time, which is really interesting. So you're doing something and it's almost like that going back to that question, like we go in, you almost have such synchronized rhythm with that stick and the beat of the drum that you don't even really realize that you're moving in certain patterns in certain ways. It's a strange feeling. It really is. And I'm almost certain that Bruce Lee was like that with himself and his hands and feet and his rhythm. That he
Uh-huh.
was at a point in the pinnacle or at a level where he could be, where he didn't think about moving and movement just became, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So this whole idea that arts can't overlap and know each other and intertwine with each other is like saying a tree doesn't intertwine with the soil. It's not true.
Yeah.
It almost has to live, and my point is that I've learned things in Jeet Kune Do and totally forgot them, and then all of a sudden I learn something in Kali and be like, God, that reminds me of Jeet Kune Do.
Mhm.
It just so overlaps,
Yeah.
But the sort of like that's for you and for I, and I think because we've studied for so long and so much, a lot of that, this is what I've discovered. You have all this knowledge and all this massive amount of professionalism that you've done all your life. It's extraordinarily hard to put on somebody that just comes into your school. They just they're inspired by it and they want it,
Hmm.
but and then you want to give it, right?
Yeah.
And I've been here so many times and I give it and it just scares the hell out of them. They're like, what? I'm so like, I don't even know how to move. Like I've realized like you cannot put that like much, right? And so we get back to this, the major, the
Yeah.
minor, the spiritual, you can't put that much on them because what ends up
Too
happening
early.
is
Yeah.
it's you're putting so much food on their plate that they can't enjoy that, little bit of taste of each thing that you're trying to give them. So
Yeah.
getting back to that picture, that's why that picture is so important to me because it's really talks about the in depth of the Kali, but it does remind me so much of the JKD, especially the philosophical part.
Well,
And that's
let me,
just, I think we're living in a time, right? And you probably, I'm sure, see this, that, of course, we're living in, computers and cell phones and it's great that you and I can have conversations like this and interviews but that is moving so fast that
mhm.
people like, hey, I heard that, there was that Flo did this type of training with some, woman that was blind. Is that true? You know what I mean? So like all of that primitive stuff just goes right out the window,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And
Um,
I think personally, and not because I like history but what is it to just forget about the cell phone, computer, and shut it all off and the lights and everything and just close your mind and just train? How is it to be at that level?
so I heard a couple of days ago that there's an unexpectedly large percentage of people who long for the old days before we were all so connected. And that included in these people, there's an age group which didn't even experience that. There are young people who were born in the age of connectedness, but they are also nostalgic for something that they never experienced. And I'm going to tell you this, everybody's talking, for example, about AI and chat GPT and what have you. That thing is so stupid. I ran an experiment today. I said to it, I go, okay, right? You're not going to believe this, but it was an experiment. I said, I need 10 compelling questions to ask in an interview of Guy Chase, the owner of Chase Academy of Martial Arts. And then I listed what you teach at your school, who you trained under, right? And whatever, whatever, whatever. Okay.
Mhm.
From what people are saying, I thought that this system is able to go crawl the internet looking for Guy Chase and Guy Chase Academy of Martial Arts, and then read what's there and formulate some really insightful questions based on you. It can't do it. It comes back with a whole generic amount of stuff that you could change the name of the person, change the name of the school, the questions would be valid. So I am not sure yet. I guess it's going to go in that direction, but right now I don't see what the fuss is about, because to me it's not that smart. So I don't know if I'm getting something wrong about it.
No, I think you're 100% correct, and that being said, because I think it erases that value part of it, that historical or that portion that we can talk about of like this things in this photo, right? That it
Yeah.
completely sort of like forgets about that. Now it can certainly say um, I don't know, if you're driving, 50 miles from your house, this is the best route to take, and they can figure that out, right?
Mhm.
But you're correct on the portion when it comes to certain elements of training and certain historical and certain preservations of knowledge. Um, no, it can't. And that's sort of like my journey. Like, who's gonna preserve that,
Yeah.
right? So if we take the Constitution and we just say, oh well, it's just a piece of paper, it's not really valid now because we live in modern time, and that's true. And I mean, you may have a point on some points, but still, it's still what we built this country on, right? We built up on certain values, right?
Yeah.
So it would be the same in comparison. Like Floro trained a certain way. He trained a certain way, and or Cal Gotch trained a certain way. They all did, right? Hermione, I mean, they all trained a certain way. That is not sort of like seen today, or it's sort of like unheard of. But so
How do you mean?
can you imagine taking a fighter and be like, okay, you get the noodles, and they're like, "Pop, pop, 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 pop," and they're so sharp, like, now you go and put a blindfold on them, right? And now if they're doing it, it's like now they're not relying on eyesight no more. So now they have to rely on something a little bit deeper than eyesight. It has to be a surface deeper than what they're used to. And so my point is that if we preserve some of this old historical training type, or this old knowledge, or this old, ways,
Mhm.
can it benefit the new ways? Or does it have some value in the new ways of training? That you can't forget about the underlying spiritual part of you,
Right.
or the heart, right? Or the emotions that are involved in training. You can't just be physical. It will only last a certain amount of time, and
Mhm.
it will gas out.
Mhm.
There has to be more that pushes you, your training and your thinking and your knowledge and your spirituality to a different level. It's even, and it's just not with martial arts. It's with really a lot of every sport that you can possibly think about. It's the ones that take it to that level that make it much much bigger,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, like, for an example, if we take Kali, we'd be like, okay, it's just rat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat. But if now we put in the spiritual aspect of it, and the thinking part of it, right, and the emotion part of it, it becomes deeper, becomes more valuable to us, and becomes more valuable to what we're doing.
Yeah.
I remember one time, I'll never forget this. It's sort of like through all your training, you remember these points. I remember upon to Mel Lopez. Boy, I just love that man. He said he said to me, "Guy, you don't look the part." And I was like, "Look the part," and I couldn't. He said, "Yeah." He says, and he would talk in that slang, that what they call pigeon talk. He goes, "Oh man, you don't have that. You don't have the body. You don't have the." And I was like, I take care of myself. I'm in great. You know what I mean? How you always took pride in my. He's like, "No, you don't have the look, the collie look." And I said, I'm just shocked. I'm like, "The collie look." He goes, "You gotta have the composure, the look, the emotion."
Yeah.
And it struck me,
Yeah.
because really what he was telling me is that, let's say you're just doing the heaven six. He says, your face expression doesn't even have it. You look almost, like you're concentrating, you're just thinking. You're
Yeah.
not really have the composure to look. And I was just taken back, because I was like, wow, he's right. It's almost like a runner before he takes off, is he's composed, or you see a cheater, he actually gets ready to compose
Right.
himself.
Yes.
And that was part of, believe it or not, this little photo of having that composure. And that's in, believe it or not, the three triads. And I have to remind myself sometimes, and even go back to what even Guru Dan's triangles are related to. Like, you can lose yourself physically.
Mhm.
You can lose yourself just completely physically. And
Yeah.
you can get, you know, like, hard about it. I've trained fighters, and I'm like, you're too hard. Like, you're concentrating on so much power and so much knockout, you're forgetting about how you can glide better, how you can move better. You can't go that deep with your emotions. Okay, then some, you're like, you're so light with your emotions, you have to bring it down. You have to get a little bit deep with your emotions and get a little bit more concentrated.
Right.
So his viewpoint, or his teaching, was dead on. I was like, composure. What is composure? You can't just physically do composure. You have to emotionally take it in and compose yourself. It's like hearing a violin. If a violin just goes, "Oh, yeah, I got to get through this," right? It won't sound right. But if it has emotion to it
Yeah.
and composure, it comes out to a whole different level. And I think Bruce Lee, Jeet Kune Do, he had that all the time. He
Of
knew
course.
how to incorporate that type
Yeah.
of volume all the time.
Yeah.
And that's what to me, that's what made him sort of like that
I
image a lot of people are drawn to.
I try not to yell at students when they don't have that Kali look. I tell them, look, there's a difference between doing the sticks and training Kali. I go, Taekwondo people who have added weaponry to flesh out their curriculum, they do the sticks. Right?
Right. Right.
It's not the same thing.
No, no, no. It's no. It's not. It's not. It's not. And that's an interesting point because I said, look, when we talk about the Kali, sometimes people will ask me the difference, and I said the and with the Kali, the rattan is it's a greatest to sort of like feel the difference between. That's why Guru Telakai used to use the big handle, the big axe, because he wanted you to have your body
Yep.
language involved with the
Yep.
striking, instead of the light stick.
So for people who might be wondering what the look is,
Oh, wow.
okay,
Right.
that's the look, right?
Right.
You got to get your hands on this, okay,
Wow.
right? March
That's great.
March 1976,
Oh my God.
okay, and the what's it? Can you see? Can you see it there? Kali,
Oh, I can.
rhythm,
Oh,
weapons, and death matches.
wow.
Yeah, yeah,
So preservation, right?
yes.
Preserva- right? You're a historical preservative. So what would we do with that? Save that magazine, please. Right?
I have two copies of
I've
it.
never seen that. I've never seen
No,
that. No, I've never seen that. I've never seen that. And it's interesting that you have that because I mean now, like, right, preservation, right? And there's value in preservation,
yeah.
right?
So this magazine, March 1976, right? It also has one of the other stories is this one, right? The continuing story of Jeet Kune
Oh,
through Danny Inosanto. Okay, so that's the cover story. But
wow.
inside is this article on Ben Largusa as well, right? Now the thing about the Inosanto article, look what it says on the last page. On the last page, it says Filipino stick fighting technique, part of JKD curriculum. Okay. So I had this magazine in 76. It took 7 years for me to get out to California, but I always had this,
Wow.
and it was only after 83 that I went back to it and I go, holy crap, Ben Largusa was in this magazine as well. Because I looked at, to be honest, looking at those, if you don't know what you don't know, that doesn't make any sense to you.
Oh, right. Right. Right.
Right? That picture
Right.
doesn't make that picture that doesn't make any sense to
Oh my God, this is Sayal. It's that
you.
right.
Okay. Right.
I can't believe I can't believe that you. Oh wow, wow.
Look at that.
That's the old. Look at that. And I mean, look at the people laying on the ground with a call, like right. It looks. You
Right.
would never think.
Look at this.
Wow, I have never seen this magazine. That is a
Are you
great.
serious?
I've never seen it. I've
Oh,
never seen it.
I gotta
I've
get you
never
one.
seen those photos. That
I
is
gotta
great.
I gotta get you one. Yeah, I mean, I now I can't remember if you know what? You know what? This is March of 1976. So I'm still in high school. I lent the original to a classmate of mine and he lost it. Now I remember. Now I remember. So years later, after the internet came along, I was able to find it and I got myself two copies of it. So one
Really?
stayed, yeah, one stays in storage, and then this one I use.
That is.
Yeah, yeah.
Was that printed in the USA? Right? Was that printed in the USA?
I think so.
Because I've never seen those photos of Grandmaster Ben. It's
So
funny and
yeah,
it's amazing to see the guys, the opponents laying on the floor, and people are like, well, what does that have to do with Kali? But the Kali is so
yeah.
encompasses a lot of technique.
Yeah, I don't think that this magazine, Fight and Arts, didn't make it, like into the top 10 or what have you, and it didn't last, right? But it was a U.S. publication out of New York. So,
Wow.
yeah. Um, and to be honest with you, the names of the people, well, Aaron Banks was their technical advisor.
Oh, well,
Okay.
I mean,
Um, and his name is the only one I recognize. I don't recognize the names of anybody else. Maybe George Cluvatos, the photo editor. That seems right. But yeah, but I'll see if I can find you one.
that's amazing because I've never seen that. I've
No?
never seen that. I've never seen those photos, and
Okay.
that's good. But it's 19. So think about this, right, for a minute. So that magazine's in 1976, and there's Dan Inosanto and there's Ben Lagusa in there, right? And we're talking 1976, and it's a great mag. I mean, for one, it's a great example of how you have two great, huge icons
Yeah.
in the martial art world that is displaying Kali and Jeet Kune, right? I mean, and saying that of course they're two different systems, they're two different arts. There's no disagreeing with that, but you can absolutely agree that the similarities
Oh my
are
gosh. Yeah.
they're so intertwined.
Yeah.
They're incredibly so intertwined.
In fact, I wanted to ask you if, so for me, one of the most fascinating, so in my junior JKD class, I teach the kids that a nickname for Kali is the art of the thing and the opposite of the thing. So if we've got an inward strike, we got a backhand strike. If I can hit inward on the high line, I can hit inward on the low line, right? I can do stuff retreating, I can do stuff advancing. I can go inward with the right hand, inward with the left hand. I can go single stick, I can go double stick, whatever. I suspect that using that kind of approach can give you a deeper insight into catch wrestling. Because I suspect that catch wrestling, you go in this way and then you make a variation and you come up with this. But then you make another variation and you come up with this other thing. But they both started the same way. Am I right?
So correct. So it's funny that you say that you can go this way inward or the back end. So when Kyle would teach, right, he was a fanatic when he would teach because he was so precision, and he had this sort of like thinking or emotion, because when you spend a lot of time with this man, he's not afraid to let his personality out, and so when he's showing you locks, he'd be like, okay, if that doesn't work, then you can just go into this one, and if that doesn't hurt him, and then you can go into that, and he's just rapidly going off to different submissions.
Yeah.
And I'm saying to myself, this man is 6'3" and at 230 pounds, and he's so light. You know what I mean? That's why I couldn't get over it, that he's moving like he's so light, like he's 130 pounds.
Yeah.
And he would say, if that fails, then you could go into this, and then if that goes, you can go, as an example, right? And of course, at that time, I was not, I knew like Yuri, but I wasn't trained under Yuri extensively, like say Eric was or anything like that. I mean, I have photos of us together and, and hit bits and pieces, but a lot of my concentration back then, because I never knew Kyle, wasn't, grappling. So when I met Kyle, I was like, what? It was so foreign to me. I was like, what is it? It's so unbelievable how a man can go in and out of locks really quickly like that. And then he, and I can tell you this by experience, he could be so heavy on your body. He could feel like 1,000 pounds on you. And then all of a sudden he could feel like a feather. I have never, even to this day, never experienced another man's energy on my body like him.
But that's major and minor. If you showed him that picture, wouldn't he be able to explain what's written on there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is another thing about Kyle Gotch a lot of people don't probably realize. He was super intelligent. He was a private man and he was super intelligent. He didn't speak loud. But when he did speak, he was super intelligent. He could read and write 5 different languages, but that doesn't mean he was intelligent. He really was philosophical about his ideology, his training in submission and catch, or I call it under his name, Kyle Gotch submission. But I remember Kyle Gotch system. Kyle Gotch himself composed all of his knowledge to him. He was a Jeet Kune Do of Catch Can.
Right.
So remember, Kyle had teachers, and he composed that into his own system. He wasn't just taught, okay, this is catch and this is now catch. He changed things. He made it into things that worked for him and how he could work. And so for you and even for myself, right, and for people that watch him, 100%. He would ball that up into, let's say, a Jeet Kune Do type of, ideology thinking, because that's what he learned from many different people, and he composed it into his own, system. Now, people can say all day, like, oh, well, remember, Kyle Gotch wrestled publicly for pro wrestling because those guys couldn't make money at real wrestling when the war was over. When the war ended, Germany was leveled. It was gone. It was like France. All the saboteurs were gone. They were killed. So after that, when those guys get introduced to what we call fake wrestling and pro wrestling, that's how they had to make their money, because they couldn't make money at the real, because none of the like shoot wrestling, all that wasn't around anymore. It was gone. And that's why he said he had to do, wrestle for, the fake wrestling, because that's how, but that's like Bruce Lee making movies, right? And saying Bruce Lee's not a martial artist, right?
Yeah.
Not true. I mean, Bruce, I don't know Bruce, and I never met him, but Seagun Bruce, I'm sure, could fight, and I'm sure he could, he could do well. But he made money in the movie business. But it doesn't mean that he wasn't a martial artist and he didn't have Jeet Kune Do. It's the same thing with Kyle Gotch. So it's so interesting for me to see that, Jeet Kune Do, Kali, all this stuff can kind of intertwine. And I try to tell people that it's try to learn a system, right? And try to understand it. And then, you can learn another system and then try to understand it. And then how you compose that together is your formulation of how you get the art. But still, you want to understand the system, because if you don't understand the system, it's like not understanding the language. I don't want to go to a different country and say, I'm asking for water, and the next thing you know, I'm insulting somebody by saying your mother looks like, a cat or something. You want to try to understand the language so you can understand where you're going with this stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think to me, it's infinity. And one of the things in college that they teach is the infinity, right? It's open. It's a never ending process. And that's what I find extremely, extremely interesting. But I can tell this too, for anybody that's listening. If it wasn't for martial arts, personally, uh, for myself, I mean, there would have been times that I don't even know where I would be in life. Because no matter what you do in life, you run across obstacles, hard times, you run across, you can't go through life and not have, you know, hardship. It doesn't matter how much financial success you have. I teach millionaires all day, Seafood. Do I teach, really highly successful people that were from nothing, no high school diploma, no nothing, and they're worth $100 million today.
Mhm.
And that's no lie. It's incredible stories with some of these people. And if you look at their past, their hardship, you're like, how is it possible that you're worth $100 million when you come out of the bowels of like the ashes, And you listen to their stories, and it overlaps to me in the same as martial arts. It's martial arts to me was such a cane for me, and yet it was such an inspiration
Right.
because I had to rely on it even to survive through hardships of life, and without it, I think I would have been lost. But that's the great value of it, right? The great value of it is that it's just not a fighting system. It's a spiritual and emotional uh, uh, a friend or adversary that you have,
Yeah.
you know, you can a companion that you can rely on in your life.
Right.
And ironically, going back to the Kali, the 3Ks sort of like incorporate that, the triad, the Kali Kali Han and the Kata Asan. It means the spiritual triangle and the rhythm triangle and the internal triangle. And it puts yourself, your spirit, your forefathers, right, your family, your values. It kind of you know balls and molds and bonds all that
Mhm.
together. So when
Yeah.
you do train, that you do have that higher level of understanding instead of just physically training. Because again,
Right.
just physically training is like just physically witnessing. You're not involved,
Yeah.
right?
Right. So I want to wrap this up with not quite a left field question, but somewhat left field. Were you ever interested when you were out in LA? Were you ever interested in the Hollywood stuff? I ask you this because here's why. So you're exactly the same size as Chad Stahelski. Okay, right?
Yeah.
And I was watching him being interviewed by Rogan a
Joe
couple of weeks
Rogan, yeah,
ago, and Rogan works with De La Grotte, right?
that's correct.
Okay,
And they still work together.
right. And
Yeah.
I'm watching the interview, and I'm like, oh man, if I was there, I could ask Chad this. I could steer the conversation in this direction, and we could find out more about the Innisano Academy, and we could this and we could,
Right.
right?
Right.
And I'm just thinking, poor Joe, he doesn't know what he doesn't know, right?
Right.
But yeah, so were you ever interested in that stuff?
So it's funny, because Chad and I were the only people in the academy from Boston.
I knew it. See, I
Yeah.
knew it.
So funny. So this is the funny story. So Chad, I think Chad's from Belmont, Mass. Actually, it's outside of Boston, and I'm from North Boston, but I have a heavy accent, and so Chad is sort of like you can tell because Chad's voice is very fast talking, so you can tell he's from Boston, right? So, and Joe Rogan's from Boston, by the way, from Massachusetts.
That's
So
true. Yeah.
so funny thing is back in the day, Chad had said to me one time, he said, "Guy, you should come down, like, and maybe do some, uh, and get involved with, Hollywood, not Hollywood at the time, but he said stunts or something." And I said, I said, I, for me, I didn't want to stand in line because I was sort of like a shy kid and stuff like that, and I didn't want to be in front of people. And and like I told Chad, I didn't have any interest in it because I was making such good money, believe it or not. because I, I was well, for one, I already had my own company, installing all the cabinets all on the $1 million homes on
Right.
Redondo Beach, and so, and I had worked for Cactus Cabinet, and I was a big wig with them, and so I was making such good money that I didn't really and being in those trades is so demanding because you have to be on the site early, and you have to, and I didn't want to give that up because that was my money to pay Goudan,
Right.
Herman, Teddy, the whole 9 yards. That was sort of like my fee I live in. So I didn't want to disturb that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
Yeah.
I said, and I remember, I'll never forget this. I remember looking at Chad, and I think Chad was, I think he might have had a bike at the time. I said, "Geez, Chad, you ride a motorcycle?" And he goes, I said, "Don't you ride it?" Because I'm from the East Coast, and East Coasters are like Harley people. And I was like, "Come here, Harley." He goes, "Oh no, my dad's a Harley guy. I like the Rice Rockets." He said, and it was so funny because we were the only people in the academy from Massachusetts, right? Or I'm from New Hampshire, but so close when you look
Yeah.
at the towns. And but I didn't. For me, I didn't have, and I have the body for it, and I have the the look and the hair or whatever,
Yeah.
and I still got my hair and it's black, and I don't dye it or anything like that. But I it didn't attract me as much as the training and being close to Gurdin and
Mhm.
going to the restaurant at night, and eating the Thai food, and we go the techniques, or he would write down things, or
Yeah.
be with Herman on set. That really intrigued me. So and then of course I was in the contracting business, and I really do love building homes and preservation of historical renovation. I love that. I've owned now 3 or 4 homes that are 18 12s and 50s, and restored them back to the original. So I have a compassion for that. you know
Mhm.
and and I guess if somebody offered me $100,000 to fall over a car, I probably would have compassion for that too. But not at that time. At that time, I just, I
Yeah.
had such a routine lifestyle
Yeah.
that I didn't really want to disturb it. You know what I mean? And I said, I gotta be on Redondo Beach and put these cabinets in by tomorrow. I can't go down to, you know what I mean, and stand in line and be, And do I dread it today? There's part of me that does, because I
Mhm.
wish I did,
Mhm.
because there's nothing like TV money, right? But at the same time, I don't think that I would have trained with Kyle Gotch. I
Right.
don't think I would have met Ben Lagusa and trained with Ben Lagusa and Mel Lopez. I don't think I would have became a professor in the Villa Lagusa Kali system, right?
Yeah.
So your path in life is sort of like meant for you. And although you kind of miss bridges and probably miss opportunity, other opportunity comes that you wouldn't have had.
Yeah.
So
As long as you
so you
stay on your path.
I stayed on my compassion for what I liked and what
Yeah.
intrigued me to be the best at what I could be at.
Sweet.
And I'm so happy for Chad. I really am, because I think now, he's taken what he learned and he's taken it to a level where because you can tell he's really compassionate about what he does. It really, really can tell that he's really, he puts it involved into a whole different world.
Yeah.
And if you saw the homes that I've purchased and renovated and brought them back to, like, oh my God, they look magnificent. They look like candy homes, or something in a Santa Claus movie or something. You can see sort of like that same compassion that I like to do at, my own. So I just stuck to what I was good at. And I probably, who knows? I mean, you always think back, well, I wonder if I could have, but you can't think that way, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's something that you just, that you wish could or whatever. But I don't think that I would have met, and this is, and I'll say this: would I ever trade in the late nights with Mel Lopez and Ben Lagusa and Goudan and Kyle Gotch and you know what I mean? Would I trade that in for money or success? Right? I mean,
Mhm.
you're successful at what you do, and other people are successful at what they do, and take the great things that you've learned on the way and hold them cherished to your heart. So
Yeah.
I don't think I would have had the times. I don't, I would have missed those boats. And to me, I don't know, being a preservative of the arts and writing about it now. I'm trying to now put everything in booklet form and stuff like that, and in film form. I don't think I would have all that.
Yeah.
So we all, as Guru Dan said, we all have our different paths, right?
There you go.
But we all reach the same point.
Yeah. It's all connected.
Hey, I gotta ask you, and I know this is right off the. Remember when me and you met up years ago when we were in Florida? Juan Bofield tried to get me in the movies at one time. There was a guy named Juan. I don't even know. I'm sure I haven't seen him in probably 35 years. I don't know.
Yeah. I haven't seen him in forever either. But he got me a gig on Charlie's. It's so funny. This old girlfriend who's calling. I was going to tell you a story about talking to her earlier this morning. Right? So Juan Bofield called me. This was 10 years ago, 2013. He and I worked in 1993, we worked on Only the Strong with Mark Dacascos.
Correct. I remember that.
And then 20 years later, he calls me out of the blue and he goes, hey, we're doing Charlie's Angels, a new TV show here in Miami. You want to come work on it? Well, I never say no to a Hollywood job. You know what I mean? Cool. So we go. It lasted one season. The episode that I was in, I wore all black with a cap. So now when I tell that story, I go, this is something I have in common with Bruce Lee. I wore all black with a cap and I lasted one season.
Oh my God. Isn't that a funny, oh my God. Right? That's a hilarious story. And I'm so glad that I asked this question because remember, he flew me down to Florida and we did this movie. I can't remember the movie was called Blood. I can't remember what it was called. Blood something, but it was like a rated B movie. And, we did it. And it was like, but I know he was sort of like in the movie business, the stunt business there for a while and stuff.
He probably still is. Because I think that he went on from Only the Strong to do a lot of work in the Spanish language TV. They do a lot of filming here, right? Last year, Ron Balicki called me. He goes, hey, I need somebody of your ethnicity with your skills. We got to do a movie down in St. Kitts, Nevis. So I was down there last August working. Do you know who Michael Jai White is? The actor?
Yeah.
Sure. Right. So that I'm thinking they're going to release that maybe next month because they just put the official trailer out. So
wow.
So
good for you. Good for you. Good for you, boy. Listen, I have to come to I do come to Florida sometimes, and by the way, Chuhan James now lives in the next the next one that carries the Kali. He lives in Florida now. He moved from Hawaii to Florida, and I got to go down and see him. But we got to connect up. I got to come down.
Okay.
I got to come down and see you. It's been way too long.
So I'm going to see if I can get you a copy of this magazine.
Please.
And then I promise you, it will not take so long again for you to be back on the program. All right.
Okay. I would really love to see that magazine because I have not seen those photos. Okay. I've never seen those photos, and I'm a big collector of the preservation of the Kali and all the other art. So it'll be very interesting to see that.
You got to come back and talk about that stuff when when you're a little bit further along in it, that preservation.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
All right, my friend. Such a pleasure, man.
Thank you so much. It's always good to see you, and I love your interviews. You always get under the underneath. Keep doing what you're doing. All right.
Thank you so much, man.
All right.
Thank you. All righty.
Okay. You too. Bye-bye.
All right. That's one of the great ones. All right. Okay. Episode number 268. So you guys know the deal. Any questions that you have, because it's really hard for me to focus on who I'm talking to and read the comments and what have you. So I'll take a look at them afterwards. I'll ask Guy to take a look at them and see if there's anything that he or I need to answer. All right. So follow me on Twitter at Dwight Woods, on Instagram at Dwight D. Woods, at paypal.me/unified Miami. The Jeet Kune Journey Volume 1 is available. PayPal.me/unified Miami. Also, you can support the show on the YouTube channel. Just click on the join link and you can see the different membership levels that we have. And you can also visit jkdrebel.com. Click on the Rebel Gear link, and that's where you'll see stuff like this, the JKD Notables coffee mug, also available in garment form and what have you. Next Friday, episode number 269 will be with Conrad Bui. Before next Friday, I'll make sure that I'm pronouncing his surname correctly. And I think we will be at the regular 6 p.m. All right, so that's it for this week. Okay. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you Wednesday on the I Love Jeet Kune broadcast, and then next Friday with Conrad Bui. All right, this is Dwight Woods of Jeet Kune Rebels signing off. Have a great time. Take care. Talk soon.